Lance Cayko, thank you so much for coming on the Inner Edison Podcast. I appreciate you being here, and it's throwing me off calling you. That last name is just not something I would have thought.
You can lean in, brother.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? All right, so we met through Podmatch. A lot of people don't know where Podmatch is, but it's a good place to go find people for your podcast or actually be on other people's podcasts if you have a podcast. Also, I'm a host, but I also get asked to come on other people's podcasts. So it's a great place to get people from, and you don't have to accept everybody. And that was what Alex says about the whole thing. He's like, please pass on a lot of people because that's what you want to do. There's enough of them. Pass on them. All right, Lance, I want to talk about, so on Inner Edison, we talk about your greatest accomplishments come from your greatest defeats. It's a podcast for business owners, entrepreneurs, people thinking about it. What got you into the realm of entrepreneurship?
Growing up in rural Northwest North Dakota and with a mother and a father who had a lot of anxiety around money. And one of their favorite phrases was saying, which is very common in America, money isn't everything. And that was a cope in hindsight, because I think one of my favorite rappers, his name is, Kanye West, everybody knows who that is. He has a lyric in one of his songs that finishes that sentence, and I think in a better way. Having money isn't everything, but not having it is. And that's, so growing up in that environment of just having anxiety around money really drove me to not want to have that anymore. So like, how do you get away from that, right? I sort of ended up having the rich dad, poor dad environment. My dad would have been the poor dad. He, just worked on the farm. God bless him. If the farm would have, his dad would have went bankrupt if dad wouldn't have stepped in and just been there and been the one running the farm. Grandpa was kind of an alcoholic, wasn't really a good farmer, all of those sort of things. One of those, and then contrasted with that, his best friend his name is Bruce. And I went to go work for Bruce. That was my first job. And Bruce is a general contractor. And Bruce's relationship with money was much different. It wasn't one about anxiety. I'm not saying Bruce was this big, famous, very wealthy, super rich general contractor, but he definitely wasn't worried about it. I remember one time, I think I was like leading up to my first job, I was like probably 10 or 11. And I'm old enough to have like a dial-up computer with a modem and everything, where it would make all the sounds. And I remember AOL CDs. So my aunt bought me this computer, and I would use the AOL CDs and put them in there, whatever, and then dialed up all the way from Northwest North Dakota to Fargo, North Dakota, not realizing that, like, oh, that's actually still a long distance call, and therefore I'm going to incur long distance charges and everything. I thought, oh, because of the internet, somehow this is not going to be a long distance call. I had no idea, right? Sure enough, mom and dad get a phone bill for like $1,000 or something. This would have been in 1994 or 5 or something like that. And you would have thought that we were bankrupt with how devastated they were about this bill. And so, like, to put it in perspective, that's what I'm trying to make a framework here. And this point that I'm making is like, when I think about $1,000, yes, it's a chunk of change, but I don't have this huge anxiety around it, and to where I'm going to then push that onto my children and everything. So that's really where the passion for me comes, is just seeing both sides of it and kind of having that rich dad, poor dad experience, where I sort of had those, because, Bruce ended up being sort of a big father figure to me, as I started working for him, and then realized like that's what I wanted to be in the end, was actually first and foremost, it's a builder. I wanted to be Bruce.
Wow. What year was that? $1,000?
That would have been like 95.
Okay, so in 95, so today, fast forward with inflation, it's probably 10 grand. So for most people to understand that, I could see where I understand what you're saying about how dealing with money is a little different. But back then, especially if you work for somebody, or if you're not making a lot of money, that's a lot of money to people. But what you're saying is, let's make sure that we're going forward, that it's not like a lot of money for us, and we can deal with it and get through it. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, I just did the inflation calculator. I had to do it. $2,176.75 is what it would account to. And so even when I got that bill, yeah, like for instance, my son, he dropped out of tech school last fall, and I had to cough up a check for $6K. Then he went to community college. I had to cough up another check for $2,000. I still don't have that kind of anxiety and pushing on
I
my son.
understand.
Like, yeah, okay.
I understand. No, I totally get it. It's just the difference is if you look back at where people are, and that's the whole rich dad, poor dad, that people need to read the book so they understand that whole philosophy. But for some people, it's everything because they don't make enough money. They don't focus on making sure there's enough money going forward. And most people think working for somebody else is more secure than working for yourself, which is not the case.
Yeah, it's exactly the opposite. I agree.
But they still think I want job security. Well, then go start your own thing. No,
And
that's not.
that's the other big reason why I'm a serial entrepreneur. So then, you fast forward, I ended up working construction from 13 until 21, went to tech school between 18 and 21 to basically a general contractor. I went to North Dakota State School of Science, got an associate's degree in building construction technology. Loved it so much and figured out how to continue going to school and actually get paid to go to school because I was getting scholarships. Then I went to North Dakota State University to become an architect because everything started clicking for me. It's like, oh, if I can become an architect first, that's how I'll get the building clients. Like no one else will have this kind of sales funnel in that way. Then I graduated in 2008. Everybody knows who is paying attention what happened in 2009, Great Recession. So I moved out to Colorado, got an internship, and those two goofs who hired me, the other architects in that firm, were so bad at business that they just put all their eggs in one basket. And so I'm very much if you go look on LinkedIn, my preferred pronouns are positive reactionary. And that's really what I try to be, is because I reacting to that negative, getting laid off and being devastated and going, "Oh, it was because these guys are horrible at business and I can't rely on anybody to keep myself stable besides myself." So I completely agree with you, Ed, and that's really why now I'm here with all of these different companies and trying to create an ecosystem of business that is sustainable.
Yeah, because a good friend of mine was in the same business. He was actually a builder in that period of time, residential, and he got out of residential and went into commercial building stuff, and he'll never go back because it's much. So again, what you're talking about, putting your eggs in one basket, he can do commercial for many different people, many different things. Where a lot of people who were in the residential real estate industry, that was their bread and butter, and that was what took them out.
Yeah.
All right. So when you saw, so how long after the two people that you worked for before you went out and started your own company?
So we moved from Fargo, North Dakota, from Northwest North Dakota, after I graduated, to Boulder in 2008, October 2008. I lasted 9 months at that architecture firm. I could see the writing on the wall. I mean, I remember actually when we were driving down and I was moving my former wife, and she was pregnant, and then we had one child at that time out of the womb. I remember actually stopping at one of the gas stations and like glancing up and seeing the CNN headlines when like things were starting to melt down and they were debating that first big bailout. So we were kind of shocked that I was able to even land a job and everything like that. And then it was a small firm, right? It was only 5 people when I got there, two owners, and then 3 workers, one of which I was in. And right away there was a good amount of work. We were busy. There was no panic. There was no sort of. There's a joke that architects say is like, when the work's running out when you're just kind of panning around the computer and like zooming in and out of a project, and you're not really doing any drafting or drawing. You're just kind of looking busy in that kind of way. So I could feel all of that coming. I was paying attention to the headlines and everything like that, and I knew the layoff was coming because these guys were just not hustlers out there trying to make sure people were fed, and they were not. They were so stuck in their ways of just only being able to do high-end residential and only being able to do high-end commercial, that they didn't see the writing on the wall of like, well, maybe we have to like change the way we're doing business and be more volume based, lower our fees, but still keep everybody fed, and we just live with a smaller profit margin for a year or two, and then kind of revamp maybe after we come out of this recession and everything like that. So I got laid off 9 months later, but right ahead of that, I was still very much in touch with my best friend Al Gore, who is now my business partner at F9, our architecture firm, and he and I were talking about it. And he got laid off first, actually. He went to work. He went out on the East Coast, so everything usually happens on the coast goes inward and stuff like that. Al was working for a very prestigious architect, Studio Daniel Liebskin. Same sort of thing, just all eggs in one basket. no diversity, just super high end kind of stuff, thinking, there's never going to be any kind of economics uncertainty going on. And Al watched Wall Street melt down from the high rise, like guys coming out with boxes. So he got laid off first. And since he was laid off first, then we started like collaborating and working together. And one of the things I was doing is I was before I would get up, before I would go to my job that I still had in Boulder there for those 9 months, I would I noticed that there was a big thing missing from the architecture side of things. So there was a transition that happened, at some point where, like in the late 70s, early 80s, we used to draw with hands, only our hands, and then we would make these blueprints, and then we moved to CAD, right? And when that transition happened, all these catalogs that architects had in their library of all these building products, they went from being able to just you would trace over the details. All of a sudden, they had to get digitized. So there was all these manufacturers of building products were starting to pay people who you could use CAD to turn that into digitals. Well, so then the same thing happened when we went from 2D CAD drawings to three-dimensional modeling software like Revit Architecture, like we use. So I knew this big shift was going to happen right around then. And one of the pieces of content that was missing from the Revit Architecture, this software, was that like high-end furniture, like designer level furniture, stuff that made the renderings and the models look pretty. And so I started making all of these high-end furniture and uploading it to this website, TurboSquid. This is all before work. And my idea is I was like, I need some kind of passive income coming in just in case, this really happens. And so I was making all those models, and I finally got I was making so many that I got an email from the CFO one day, and she says, "Hey Lance, like you are uploading more models than anybody in the world right now in this particular piece of software." And I told her about my goals, and she was like, "Can we get on the phone, because I've got manufacturers." So my prediction was right. I got manufacturers that also are going to need their content turned in. So I sort of had that in the bank, ready to pounce on my own in case I got laid off. And then the layoff did happen. And what I did is I fell right back on my handyman skills, and like the day of, and put up these Craigslist ads. And I'm again sort of this, that those preferred pronouns I was talking about, positive reactionary. I would add like a contrarian to it too. Like I'm always trying to like test the opposite, or my brain just thinks the opposite of what mainstream media is doing. Big crowds, I'm trying to do the opposite, that sort of thing. And it's always usually worked out pretty well for me. So I went and looked at my competitors on Craigslist. I was like, who would I be competing against if I'm just freelancing construction stuff? Just one guy, right? Like painting rooms, putting up trim, tile, whatever. And it was like all these old curmudgeons, these older dudes who probably had a substance problem between like they were like 40 and 60 years old, really, really poorly written ads and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, what is the opposite of that? The opposite of that is me. So I started these little ads, and I would put them out in Boulder. And the idea was, to be the opposite. It was like, I started mine, and it was smart, handsome, master's degree, sober, handyman, and all of those things. And then I could even add these images to it, because you could write a little bit of HTML back in the day, and you could insert those in Craigslist. And I was just never busier. It was insane. I had all these housewives calling me that were way more comfortable with me coming in the house than those crabby old guys. And so I worked for cash while I was waiting on the that modeling work to come through. I never had to take unemployment insurance. Like for me, it's a very proud thing. And then eventually the CAD stuff did come in, and then I landed a house. I landed a clinic, of which I wasn't even licensed to do at that point, because I was an unlicensed architect. Brought that back to the firm that laid me off, and then we partnered for a little bit. And then Al Gore graduated, my business partner. He graduated because he went back to school thinking, after he got laid off before me, oh, this recession is going to last a couple years. We didn't know any better. We were just like 23, 25. We had no idea. It didn't. So by the time he then graduated with his second master's in construction, he had to go back and live with his mom and dad. And then he came back, and he was just like tail between his legs. And he's like, I was like, well, I got this house, I got this clinic. I think I have a formula for like how we can get work sort of in a guerrilla kind of way under the radar. how much cash you got? And he's like, I got enough for a couple months. And I go, well, the apartment right above mine opened up. It's a 1 bedroom. It's perfect. Like, let's try it. And so, he came down and kind of just writings on the wall for the rest of it. We starved for a couple years, but then the economy started to pick up. When it started to pick up, we needed to hire. And the people we were reaching out to hire, it was local. So it'd be CU Boulder for us. They weren't quite qualified. We reached out to the university and said, hey, we want to hire your people, but they just aren't adept in this software that we know. Do you have any? We have master's degrees. We could teach. Like, do you have any opportunities? We're happy to help. And sure enough, they had a class. So now we've been teaching that class for about 10 years. It's kind of been our farm league for how we groom employees, who groom them from students to TAs to employees and all that. And it's been, since then, it's been just a beautiful, steady trajectory of growth. And I'm really glad that we actually got to start the company in a Great Recession. And people ask me that all the time. They're like, when I go on other shows, when is the best time to start a company? Like, and I go, oh, during a Great Recession or Depression. And they're like, what? And I'm like, because you'll never be hungrier. Therefore, you'll never be more creative. Like, your back's against the wall. You have no choice but to get out there and grind and figure it out and like be the leanest, meanest machine you can be.
I totally agree. Now that I got a word in for the last, I didn't want to interrupt you. You're on a roll there. I want to ask one question. So you were doing the furniture, right? Converting that. And then whatever happened with that? You just did everything you needed to do and you were done? Or
so
because that was what you were doing, you were creating all that stuff.
Yeah.
I heard
so
about
all that.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So all that stuff still lives on that website. Every once in a while, I'll get a small royalty check or something like that. But remember that what that work led to was like, then I got this direct connection to these manufacturers who wanted us to translate their 2D CAD details into these 3-dimensional models. We ended up parting ways with TurboSquid because TurboSquid ended up being sort of this middleman. And what we ended up doing is then I formed this relationship with Sumex Design. And Sumex Design was actually the spearhead of where that work was coming from. So then we were able to make more money together in that kind of a way. We worked with Sumex Design, Robert Wygant, another one of my very favorite people in the world, business mentors, would not be here without him. We worked together from 2009 to about 2016, 15, 16. And then that work kind of went away because exactly what you said, Ed, most of it was completed, right? And we kind of got to that threshold.
Right. I mean, because you can only, just the newer stuff that would come out, right, would have to be updated.
Yeah.
And all right, starting the company with your business partner, what is the number one thing you need to worry about with business partners?
The number one thing is, I think there got to be a transparency, and I think you can't do. There has to be. You have to agree on a salary that you guys are going to pay yourselves, and you need to become a W-2/W-4 employee almost immediately. Like, there's none of this. Let's just pile our money into a bank account and then decide like every 2 weeks where we're going to pull out. For me, I think that's one of the biggest. That's one of the biggest things. Is that sort of level of trust. Just openness right of way. So, and then there's the yin and the yang. That's probably the other big part of it. Like, I'm trying to be very tangible with the bank account as an example, just one example, right? But like anything with the business should be that kind of open book between you two. I think there's need a balance. So I'm very type A. Al is more type B. He can be type A, but I think like if then you had to categorize, like I'm alpha, he's probably a sigma. And, we balance each other out like that. I'm much more of an engineer type mind, and he's much more of an artist type mind. If you can have a good balance with that, because it's just like my girlfriend, she's also like very type A, but somehow we make it work. I don't think we could be business partners though, so that you really need that sort of balance.
Because I think people don't realize whoever you're in work with, they should do things that you are not good at.
Yeah.
Right. And that's with business owners. You need to do what you're best at and have somebody else handle everything else. And that's the same thing with you. You shouldn't go into business with the same person, because then you guys are doing the same thing, and it usually doesn't work. And the reason I brought that up is because I had Rob Angel on a while back, and he was talking about Pictionary. But what I talked to him about was how he picked his partners. And I think it's very important to understand that in everything in your life to be able to pick your partners properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're lucky that you had somebody that you knew for a while, right? It wasn't just that, and then they got all in their degree and it just worked out in timing. And you're right. The best time to build anything is during a recession. I hate building companies, especially mortgage companies during a refinance boom,
Oh
because
gosh.
yeah, it's the worst. The 2020 through 2022 was the worst time for me. And everybody's like, how could it be? You should be doing, you don't make as much on your stuff, first of all. And in the first year and a half, you're paying to get everybody in place to handle it, and you make all your money the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it
people,
sounds like a nightmare.
it is actually. That's why I would tell people I never want to. I'd rather build, retool, and look at certain things during the times that are bad, like right now because of inflation, where rates went up to more, 35% of the existing home sales. That's all it is. And I knew that was going to happen when we did what we did, putting people in 2% and 3% interest rates. We would take a lot of people out of the market for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what was one of the biggest mistakes you made building the current business that you have? I know you have multiple businesses because you have architecture firm, and then you also have a general contracting firm, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
On your architect firm, what was probably the number one, and to you, failure that happened while you were building that?
I think there's been multiple. So, and I can just rattle them off here. The we hired. I think the one of the first hires was we hired somebody that was 10 years older than us. So we thought they don't need to be trained like maybe somebody who just came out of school, and it was a disaster. So then that taught us, nope, we don't care how much experience somebody else has. We could hire an 80-year-old, and I'm 41 right now, like a master Pritzker Prize winning architect, and I would still say, nope, we're going to treat you like you don't know anything about this software and our processes and all of that, and like you're going to be like a mold, like a ball of clay, and we're going to mold you into what you need to be. I think that was a good one. And then there was one gentleman at one point, the only person I've ever had to fire, is I allowed him to just push his way into the firm rather than just say, "Hey, there's nothing for you, buddy. I'm sorry." Like this was we hired him to do some temporary construction work, and he really wanted to be an architect, but during his interview process, when he wanted to be the architect first, and a building helper last, it sort of got flipped, and he was a building helper for this little 3-month project we ended up building. But I should have said no, because it ended up being like a very long, drawn out. Ah, I knew it. I just, it's sort of like getting in a bad relationship, dating wise. That's kind of what it was. And then the third one is early on in my career. I was just telling one of my best friends who came down, has his own firm. He's 5 months deep into starting it up. And I said, one of the biggest lessons that I learned was for the first half, we've been in business for 14 years. So about the first 7 years, 7 to 10, I always thought I had to have the answer when a client would ask me something. And then now I'm just very comfortable. If I don't know, I just smile and say, I don't know, but I'm happy to look into that for you. Never done that before. I know we can do it. I just have to look into it. Like, having that confidence is huge. And it's hard when you're young and starting out, though. So I have a lot of empathy for like former Lance, younger Lance, or even whoever, anybody else listening to the show, and they're thinking about starting a company, or they're in year one. Like, I'm telling you, year one person, you know, just feel comfortable. But like, I can't make them feel comfortable in that kind of a way. But yeah, that's one of the more empowering things.
Yeah, that's the same thing in sales for most people. That's what you were doing when you're talking to
Hmm.
people, even though you're architect, but you're telling people, yes, I could do it. But you're right, you can't know everything. And that's the same thing with me for the last 15 years. The guy got to a point where I just said, I tell people, I stopped trying to remember everything, because if I don't like the way it is today, don't worry, it's going to change by tomorrow in our industry. So it's always a constant change. But I can find it in a few seconds. So let me go find it. Get
Yeah,
back to you. Yeah.
yeah.
Because everything's there now. This is different than it used to be, right? When I
Mm.
first got in this business, this is how old, fax machines. We'd order a credit
Yeah.
report, and that thing would come over a fax machine. And now
Wow.
we're instantaneous in seconds, So
Mm-hmm.
it's a totally different world.
Yeah.
How has your contracting firm helped your architecture firm?
Oh, we have such an amazing feedback loop now. And I think that's the problem with a lot of architects is they don't have that instant feedback loop of, I'm out there in the field with the guys, the construction side of things, and they're just pointing out the reality of, wow, these drawings are not what they need to be. This detail wasn't thought out in the way it should have been. There's no it maybe is good example of like, how do you expect the guys to install that? Like they can't even get their hand in there and nail it. Like we need to be thinking like this. So the feedback loop of me being a GC, also a general contractor, and then coming back into the architecture firm and saying, here's what we need to start doing on the drawings. And just with our architect brains and thinking through it in that kind of way, it's made us better architects. That's probably the number one thing that it's done for us. People also love the idea that we're like a white glove shop now. So I mean, you come to us, we'll design it, we'll build it. You don't have to do this interview process. And I think people want that sort of convenience. So it's definitely helped our architecture side from just that bottom line. And then the other one too is then sometimes we bring people from the field, from the architecture office, and they go in the field for a while and actually pound nails. And then they come back and they go, okay, I have a lot more empathy for the guys in the field. I'm like, yeah, they're risking their lives every day to like make the buildings happen. So we can't just think we're these smarty pants in the office and be disconnected in that way.
No, you need to walk a mile in their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's the problem you run into any company, the way they're set up is if they don't, and I'll just get into sales, marketing, and all the other, they all think they're better than the other people when in reality, they're all the same. So,
Yeah.
Lance, thanks for coming on the show today. Anything else you want to add before you go, and how do people find you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the questions and all that. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I will link in with anybody. There's only one person in the whole world with my name, Lance, last name Cayko. It's pronounced Psycho. But I will link in with anybody who wants to link in. And then if anybody wants to hear what we tell our story about our firm, Inside the Firm podcast. We started episode 0. We started it in 2017. I think we have like 700 episodes at this point. And our Friday show we laid it all bare. We just thought once we got to year 7 at our company and we passed that threshold of we're probably not going to fail, I want to spread that positive message about how other people can do it too, especially in those kind of hard times. So check out InsideTheFirmPodcast.com.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, Lance. I really appreciate you being here today.
Appreciate you, buddy.